It's a great pleasure to introduce our special guest this afternoon, Ayya Suvira. Ayya Suvira received her higher ordination at Dhammasara in 2019. She now resides at Metarama Nuns Monastery in Sydney. Currently, Ajahn Sujato is her teacher. Suvira Bhikkuni is the author of Walking in the Sunshine of the Bikunis, a biography of Ranjani de Silva, the woman behind the Bikuni Revival. And we're very pleased that Ranjani has joined us this afternoon. We've asked Ayya to speak about the stories of Buddhist women associated with the Bikuni ordination, and in particular, Ranjani, the subject of her book. Thank you very much, Ayya, for joining us. And now it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for that lovely introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And, thank you for putting so much effort into organising this as well. And, just acknowledging the presence of Venerable Vijayananda from the Saccadida Centre in Sri Lanka. And also Ranjani Auntie herself, who's been very quiet, but it's lovely to see you too. Just thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, I really feel very honoured to explain a little bit about Ranjani's bio. The original reason I was asked to write Ranjani's biography by my nun teacher, Ayya Upeka, was because she felt that many of the key figures involved with the Theravada Bikuni Revival were getting older, and that the time to tell their stories was really now. And, since that time, Ayya Kusuma has also passed away. So I had been very fortunate too to get the chance to interview Ayya Kusuma and to be in correspondence with her right up until the point where she became unwell. So that's been a real privilege for me. And, for people who mightn't necessarily be aware about why Ranjani, why her contributions are significant, when we think about the Bikuni Revival, there's two main areas where where attention has been given in recent years to the possible reintroduction of full ordination for Buddhist nuns. So one is in the Theravada tradition, the other being in the Tibetan tradition. But certainly in respect of the Theravada tradition at least, Ranjani has been described as being a prime mover of the revival and, possibly even the person most responsible. And that's because of her consistent contributions through the late 80s and early 90s, through Saccadida International. Her presidency of Saccadida International spanned the years after 1995, so she had been a former president. And, her key contribution to that had been as an organiser of the 1993 Saccadida International Conference in Sri Lanka, and also as an organiser of the famous 1996 ordination, which was widely credited with restoring the Theravada Bikuni order. So that's a little bit about the context. And, for me as a nun, it was interesting to write in detail about the 1996 ordination. But what I wanted to share with everyone this evening was mostly just to share some things that I found inspiring from Ranjani's biography, just in the context of it being a Buddhist woman's story. So I hope that's okay with Ranjani. We've worked very closely. So I'm just going to read out a few passages that I thought were representative, because actually, when we think about Theravada, sometimes the type of literature we have access to, there's not necessarily a lot of high quality writing available on Theravada Buddhist women's stories. I could count the number of publications on my hand. I think maybe we have Ayya Khema's biography, we have Ayya Kusuma's biography, which is a bit hard to get your hands on. outside of maybe Sri Lanka. Deepa Ma's biography, Meiji Gayu's biography. But some of these books, actually, they're not necessarily written by women. Meiji Gayu's biography in particular, that was, as far as I know, was written after her death. So when we encounter Theravada, because we're not necessarily always encountering women's stories, we can get the idea that Theravada is, somehow a tradition that doesn't have women's stories, which would be incorrect, because, the type of Theravada we get internationally as well, it's sometimes a very filtered Theravada. That what we see from Ranjani's story is that, women who are living in Theravada countries, of course they have their own stories, and, they have role models, rituals, and life experiences around having, that all center around the lived experience of Theravada women. So I just wanted to share a little bit about some things in Ranjani's life that I found inspiring. So Ranjani comes from a long line of wise and engaged Buddhist women. And, an early influence in her life being her mother. Ranjani was born in 1937, but already her mother was the president of the local Buddhist Women's Association. So already, she was in a lay leadership role where, she'd set up a weaving centre to give employment to local women.
Recording in progress.
And as far as I understand, okay, there's a bit of an echo, not sure what's going on. Okay, echo stop now. Echo's back. Maybe if people in the audience could put their microphones on mute, it may help with the echo. Okay, but so Ranjani's mother, very typical of that generation. She was married at 14, but Buddhism, remained a very important part of her life. And even as a married woman, she continued to do charity activities in the local community. Things like treating malaria victims. So Ranjani had mentioned about, her mum even going to boil pots and pots of herbal medicine to go and serve and help the malaria victims at the local dispensary. So this was, this was even before people were going to the hospital. So her mum had had a role in taking the first malaria patients to the hospital to introduce them to modern malaria medicine. So all of these things that were already happening on a village level, back in the 1930s and 40s, where we have, women taking on these local leadership roles, and, malaria only being eradicated in Sri Lanka in 2012. So when Ranjani is describing her own mother, she's describing someone who's a leader, a counsellor, and a manager. And, Ranjani had mentioned about the weaving centre where they were giving employment to girls at a village level, or to young women. And, they got the teachers in from the government small industry department who lived with Ranjani's family. And, that's something engaged that's happening in the community. And something I wanted to share was Ranjani's own, what she's related to me about that experience of, of textile manufacturing and that role at a village level as something that's being a woman's activity that's, helping to generate some income. And she said that it's like the story of the 16-year-old weaver girl who came to the Buddha. So this is actually a story from the Dhammapada commentary. And I thought it was nice to share because, it shows how we do actually have these women's stories that already exist within the Pali textual tradition. So in the story of the weaver girl, she's 16 years old, and she'd already been practicing the recollection of death for 3 years. And, the Buddha had seen that the time was ready for this Weaver girl's awakening. So the Buddha and the girl had, this kind of cryptic exchange or cryptic conversation. And, the Buddha's addressed this 16-year-old girl, and he's asked her, sorry, the translation's a little bit old, but I'll read it out as it is. "My girl, where have you come from?" And the girl's replied, "I don't know, Reverend Sir." And the Buddha's asked, "Where will you go?" And the Weaver girl has replied, "I don't know, Reverend Sir." And to which the Buddha's replied, "Do you not know?" And the girl said, "I know, Reverend Sir." And the Buddha's asked, "Do you know?" And the girl has replied, "I do not know, Reverend Sir." So I don't know if people were actually following that, but we have already as a kind of riddle. So where's she coming from? She doesn't know. Where's she going? She doesn't know either. And the Buddha's asked her, "Don't you know? Do you not know?" And she's replied, "I know." And the Buddha's asked her, "But do you know?" And she said, "I don't know." So what's going on with this conversation? And, people, like there's a crowd already, and people have shamed this young girl for her answer, thinking that she should have said, actually, she's the weaver's daughter. She should have just said, where I've come from is the weaver's house, and where I was going is the weaver's workshop. However, there was a deep meaning to her answers, and the Buddha silenced the crowd. When the Weaver girl said that she didn't know where she came from, she meant that she didn't know where she came from before she was born. When she said that she didn't know where she was going, she meant she didn't know where she would be reborn after death. When she said that she knew, she meant that she knew that she would die. When she said that she didn't know, she meant that she didn't know the time, or whether it would be day or night. The Buddha expressed that the crowd hadn't understood her meaning, and that those who have the eye of wisdom will see. The Weaver girl attained stream entry. So this is a story that Ranjani has related from the Pali Dhammapada commentary, showing, the wisdom of Buddhist girls and women. So that was just something I wanted to share because I just found it memorable. I'm not, I don't have any huge logic for what I'm sharing this evening. Just things that really stood out to me as being memorable. So another woman who had an impact on Ranjani's life was her aunt. And the chapter in the book is Auntie Lay Disciple. So the reason I wanted to share this was that basically the picture that Ranjani's painted of her aunt, it describes, what life was like for female, renunciant practitioners before the Bhikkuni Revival and before any of the other forms of nuns ordination. So this is, back in the day when, women weren't even, really encouraged to even wear brown. So Ranjani's aunt was staying at home wearing white as a laywoman practitioner. And they called her Auntie Upasaka, Upasaka being the devout Buddhist female practitioner. So because she didn't have access to nuns ordination, because, this was how things were in the past, She observed 8 precepts continuously while staying at home. So that's to say, in addition to the regular 5 precepts of a Buddhist lay devotee, she had undertaken a degree of renunciation. So Ranjani recalls, running to see her on the way to the temple. And even though she was quiet, they always liked to see her. So after her husband passed away, she lived by herself in a house with another woman to assist her. It was only later that Ranjani understood that she was different. At home, 24/7, Auntie Upasika dressed in white and wore a white shoulder shawl. She spent her days by herself, and once in a while she would attend temple. Ranjani's understanding is that she was influenced by her son, Venerable Mirise Gunasiri, who gave her religious instruction. She led the life of a renunciant. In their district, they didn't have Sila Matas, although there were Sila Matas in other districts by this time, meaning mother who upholds virtue. Sila Mata ordination was a makeshift cultural ordination form that had emerged in the absence of Bhikkhuni ordination in Sri Lanka. When they went on pilgrimage to places like Kataragama or Anuradhapura, they would suddenly see a woman walking on the road, wearing light yellow cloth. In their district, they didn't have any respect for these women. They weren't recognized or respected in the village. Ranjani had no idea at all about Sila Matas. Ranjani says, Upasika Nanda, so Nanda meaning auntie. She was the only one. Now I realize why she was in white all the time. Ranjani does not recollect seeing women wearing yellow at that time. There was nobody in yellow in her village. So yellow here meaning, whatever colour the nuns' robes were. At Auntie Upasika's funeral, held in Ranjani's school days, was huge. And Ranjani said it was like a Mahanayaka. So a Mahanayaka is the head of a monastic fraternity who was elected by the Sangha Council. So it's the senior position in Sri Lankan Theravada Buddhism. There was a big cremation fire and many monks came, as if it were the funeral of a senior monk. There was a lot of respect. So I wanted to share that story because it shows us, some of the, just the general environment of the 1940s, early 1950s. Before we have some of these ordination forms that we had today. So if it weren't for the Bikuni Revival, this is what life would be like for nuns. Just this situation where the female practitioners are expected to stay at home and, just to lead a quiet religious life. But we also see the contradictions involved in that, because on the one hand, Auntie Upasika, she's practicing at home. But on the other hand, we see so much respect that Ranjani has relayed around her funeral, that she was treated like she was a senior monk. So a little bit illustrative there too about, the type of opinions that Ranjani recalls having about, women who might have already taken a Sila Mata ordination elsewhere, so as a 10 precept nun. And, Ranjani recalling that they didn't know anything about these women in the village and they didn't have respect for them. So, when we think about the Bhikkhuni Revival today already, this is a very different world. So just a little bit of sharing. And I think I have half an hour, so I'm going to skip through some of the content I wanted to share, because one of the things I really liked about this book, just on a personal level, is the chance to share some of the things that we don't obviously see in stories of Buddhist male or monk practitioners. For example, some of the rituals that are really women's rituals and women's life experiences. things like, the coming of age ceremony that is widely practiced throughout South and Southeast Asian cultures. So the concept of having, a celebration around the time a girl, turns 12 or is in her early teens to mark the transition into womanhood. It's something that's a bit alien to Western culture. And when we think about Theravada, this isn't necessarily the type of thing that we think about because, we get this very sanitized version of Theravada in the West. But, when we think about lived experience, this is the type of experience that Theravada women are actually going through. So what's actually, involved in a coming of age ceremony in these countries? Typically there's some type of seclusion involved where the girl, spends some time away from people and away from men. So I'm just going to read a little bit here about Ranjani's coming of age ceremony. So when Ranjani came of age, they cooked milk rice and traditional sweets such as kaum, which is oil cake, and kokis, which are rosette cookies, for the day of the bathing ceremony. The Dhobi woman came and Ranjani was bathed, and the Dhobi woman received gifts of money and rations. Ranjani received presents of jewelry. Although they didn't have a party for Ranjani's coming of age, some family members came with the milk rice and traditional sweets. She was given a white silk dress to wear, and they took a small photo with the neighbours. After she came of age, she wasn't allowed to go to school for 1 week. In fact, she was basically locked in the room. They had a small room that was sometimes used for females. She wasn't allowed to see any males, and they didn't have any males in the house. For 5 or 6 days, she wasn't allowed to eat anything fried in oil. She was given simple food or curry. I asked if it was boring in the room. Ranjani said yes. It was like when she was locked in the room with measles. And again, that's, that's a nearly, I was going to say nearly universal, but quite common women's custom that exists in, right across the Theravada countries in South and Southeast Asia, also in India as well. Although in India proper, because of colonization, I think the, the percentage observance of this particular woman's custom is a little bit reduced. But, right through in, even as far east as Cambodia, Buddhist women have this custom of coming of age seclusion. So maybe nothing new for the Sri Lankans who have joined us this evening. But something I wanted to share mainly for the Westerners to show, how Theravada also has these life cycle rituals for women in traditional Buddhist countries. And, that also extends to birth too, that Ranjani is obviously a mother. And, even while she was pregnant, Buddhism is offering customs that, are supportive and, also bringing meaning during the pregnancy. Ranjani recalled reciting the Angulimala Purita, which is the chanting, that comes from the Arahant Angulimala. And, he used to be the former mass murderer, but after he found the Buddha, he became harmless. So that's the origin of this chanting for the well-being of the child throughout the delivery. So I have 4 minutes, and I haven't even talked about Ayya Khema yet. So, and Ranjani too, another thing I really liked about her story was that she was working as well. And, if we read literature that's out there about Buddhist women, we very rarely get stories of working Buddhist women. And that's just, because of the age of some of these books that we have out there. Like Deepa Ma, someone who was married quite young, became a housewife, very inspirational in her own right. that, as people who might, as women who might have careers, not necessarily something that's always easy to relate to. But Ranjani, she did have the very full career with the State Engineering Corporation in Sri Lanka before giving up work, where, she's given more time to meditation, to Buddhism. And she's also met Ayya, who's been a nun, who's had this very transformative impact on Ranjani's life. And I had a little passage where Ranjani is commenting on how strong Ayya was. But here we are, about founding the Nuns Island in Sri Lanka. So Venerable Kema had been attracted to an island which was close to the monks' island. There was nobody living on that particular island. There were a few islands where a number of families lived. Ranjani was impressed that she had made it into a nun's island, saying, "I don't think any other person could do that." The island had formerly been a desolate place where they released cobras and other snakes after catching them. At considerable expense, Venerable Kema had a hall and a library built. So this Nuns Island, it went on to have a very big impact also on the development of Buddhism in Australia, as very early visitors to the Nuns Island included Ayya, who went on to become the abbot of Dhammasara Nuns Monastery, and also Ayya Naroda, who also spent a period as co-abbot of the Dhammasara Nuns Monastery. So, Ranjani's encounter with Ayya, also learning meditation, in a context where meditation is being taught by a very strong female Buddhist nun, that's something that's really had a very transformative experience. And I haven't even gotten to 96, oh no, because what's happened, from that experience of meeting Ayya, that's really been the tipping point where Ranjani's since gone to attend the 1987 International Nuns Conference in Sri Lanka. And from there, she's made the connection. There's been the 1991, the next conference in Thailand. I think that's when I'm trying to remember when the name change occurred to Saccadida. But please correct me, it may have been 91 or it may have been after that. And, from there, she's gone on to organize the 1993 Saccadida International Conference in Sri Lanka. And, what Ranjani is recalling happening is that, all of the local nuns for the first time, they're seeing Bikunis. Bikunis from different countries in the world. And people are getting inspired. There's a lot of conversations happening. And from there, the monks also took an interest, people like Venerable Mapalagama Wipulasara. And they've invited these Korean Bikunis to organize the ordination for the local Sri Lankan nuns in 1996. And, those first 10 candidates really being, the tipping point where we can mark the beginning of the modern Theravada Bhikkuni Revival. I'm not saying it's the first ordination because obviously there had been earlier ordinations, one of them being in 1988 at Shilai in the US. But it was the 1996 ordination that really got the media coverage. And from there, that was the point where the ball started rolling towards 1998. And, once this issue was taken up, there's been continuous ordinations, from that point onwards. So, picking a starting point is a bit arbitrary, but I think it's undeniable that 1996 ordination was really a tipping point. And we also see Ranjani relating stories about Venerable Sangwon Sunim in particular. Venerable Sangwon Sunim being the Korean Bhikkuni preceptor for that ordination. And, if I had more time, I would have really loved to have told you all a bit more about Venerable Sangwon, because, her own story of coming to Sri Lanka from the 1980s and being a student of Sanskrit in Sri Lanka, she's went on to receive international awards and to be recognised for her role in building cultural exchange between Sri Lanka and Korea. She has the relic at her temple, which she founded, which is the Baimyong Temple in Seoul. And herself quite a strong female Buddhist leader in helping to transmit the lineage from Korea to Sri Lanka. And I think that's going to be the point where I'm going to wrap up.
No. Ayya Suvira, you're very welcome to continue, because I feel you've sort of brushed over the ordination a little bit. And I think that's what people would really like to hear about, how it all came together. And, half an hour is just an arbitrary figure.
Oh, okay, sure.
We can certainly keep going. I think people are for you to keep going.
Because if I could have like another 10 minutes or so, I can share some things I found inspiring from the ordination.
And also, if people have questions for you, please put them on the chat room and we'll get to those. And before we wrap up this evening, we'd love to hear from Ranjani. But please, 10, 15 minutes.
Sure. Because, it was just really something that people thought was never going to happen, the ordination. And I have a little excerpt that I wanted to share around that. Just an excerpt that shows, the determination that Ranjani had, that Ayya Kusuma had, that this group of 10 nuns had, in actually making this happen. Okay, so this is the excerpt. So at this point, they've taken, where are we up to? Anyway, this is in the lead up into 1996. And at this point, they'd been preparing the robes for 1996 and they knew that the ordination was coming. And by this time, Ranjani was getting threats. And a member of the Buddhist Men's Association had told Ranjani, "Madam, a person like you doing things like this is against the Vinaya and Dhamma. Did you speak to the monk?" Ranjani replied, "I said, these are the things you have been saying for the last 1,000 years, scaring the woman not to do this." He told me, "You are doing things against the Vinaya and Dhamma, huh?" I said, "These are the stories you have been telling and not allowing the woman to go ahead. All these 1,000 years you have stopped us. You can't stop it now." He said, "Can you go speak to this Nayuena Arya Dhammatera?" I said, "I have my great respect for them. Please leave them alone. If the Buddha is there, only I will ask him. Nobody besides of Buddha I have no doubts about. I'm going ahead." I remember that very well. They were scaring us all those 1,000 years, not allowing us to go ahead. I used to get telephone calls scolding me. And my own family sisters said you were doing things against the Mahanayakas' wishes. They are like Buddha for them. They aren't the Buddha, the Mahanayakas. They are respected monks. So just, illustrating some of the determination that Ranjani had to actually go ahead with 1996. Because one of the really fascinating and strong points of 1996, just to talk a little bit about the ordination itself. So we have these, 10 candidates who've come from Sri Lanka to Sarnath and, led by Ayya Kusuma. And, the ordination itself being given by the Korean Sangha. And for me, this was one of the really wonderful learning experiences about this ordination, was just to learn about the international cooperation that was really required to make it happen. So, you know, the Korean Sangha that was involved, it was actually the 5 main orders of Korean Buddhism. So really representing the entire Korean tradition. You know, led by the leading Korean Buddhist order, which is the Jogye order. And, you know, all of this international cooperation, also going back to Venerable Vipalasara's background with the World Buddhist Sangha Council, and also with I think the Korean Buddhist Sangha Council. So really showing a very high degree of harmony and cooperation in making the ordination possible. And again, many senior nuns as well from Korea being present. And I think something nice to share as well, maybe, you know, some of the positive outcomes for nuns involved in the 1996 group, because I'll just read the names of the 1996 group of nuns. So Venerable Kolanawe Kusuma, Venerable Habarana Chinta Chandradasi, Venerable Matale Vijita, Venerable Gal Subhadra, Venerable Bandrawala Sudamika, Venerable Peliagoda Sudarshana, Venerable Panadura Wekada Badra, Venerable Pasura Sama, Venerable Kurinagala Subhadra, and Venerable Kurinagala Hemapali. Because for me, you know, just learning about this ordination was such a huge experience, because, you know, when you follow these issues, you think, oh, I know about 96, I know about 98. And then I realized actually I don't, because firstly, the preceptor only speaks Korean. She hasn't really spoken much about this particular ordination. So there was a lot of confusion in the literature, you know, about what actually even really happened. And I think, you know, unless anyone had actually talked to the preceptor herself, they're likely to hold probably some misunderstandings about what actually occurred. And I think it's a bit disappointing that, you know, we have this whole international back and forth that gets very legalistic, and that, you know, no one's really making the effort to engage the preceptor herself, which was Venerable Sangwon. So actually having that opportunity to connect with Venerable Sangwon via the interpreter, I really need to thank Professor Ensu Cho and Venerable Yujong for her help in that. Also Ayya Tatalika for putting it all together. That was just such a lovely experience, because you know, when we think about like who actually owns the history of these ordinations, it's really the preceptor. You know, she's the one who's done the work. She's the one who's verified the candidates, you know, and a lot of money's gone into this, a lot of effort. But sometimes, you know, the contributions of the female preceptors themselves, like Venerable Sangwon, you know, even in a lot of the literature, it doesn't have her correct monastic name. It has her lay name, because, you know, that was what appeared on the passports. So, you know, including, you know, even like little details like the correct monastic name of the female preceptor for 96. That was something I felt personally was quite an accomplishment. So before I finish off, I just wanted to share some positive outcomes about the 96 group, because sometimes people wonder, like, where are the 96 group now, because we don't necessarily hear a lot about them. I just need to find my page though. So there were many successes of the 1996 ordination. This ordination was both early and groundbreaking, and Ranjani has recounted her difficulties with characteristic humour and honesty. Her struggles through adversity and tribulations that are inherent in any new project seem to have paid off. With a high retention rate, the 1996 ordination can be considered an overall success. Venerable Kusuma went on to teach internationally, becoming a visible and prominent leader of the global Bikuni Revival, and later developed the Ayya International Buddhist Meditation Centre. Of the remainder of the 1996 Sarnath ordination group, Before long, Venerable Martale Vijita was offered land where she had her own nunnery. The nunnery, Gautami Arama, is in Olibodawa on Horana Road and is now a large centre with many bhikkunis near what is now the Ayakema Centre. Venerable Sudamika remained in India, learned Hindi, and continues to serve at the Indian Mahabodhi Society. Even though Venerable Panadura Wekkadabhadra had returned before the end of the training due to family issues, she joined the Dambula group later. Venerable Pastorasama later returned to India to support Indian Bikunis as a missionary and subsequently led further Bikuni training and ordination programs, including organising the 2009 Bodh Gaya Bikuni ordination. Venerable Peliagoda Sudarshana became a US resident. She obtained her green card after becoming a Bikuni. She completed a second master's at the Buddhist Impala University and later a PhD. Venerable Sudarshana's other later accomplishments included founding the Samadhi Buddhist Meditation Centre in Florida. She became the first Sri Lankan Bikuni preceptor in America, serving as Bikuni preceptor for numerous Bikuni ordinations in the USA, together with Venerable Walpola Piyananda since 2010. She never gave up, said Ranjani. Venerable Sudarshana said, "It's been given to us, I have taken it, that's the end of it." Ranjani remarked that she kept to that line and she was very strong. However, two of the group didn't continue with the training and returned to living as Sila martyrs. So I thought that might be a good point to wrap up because, we do see, there were such positive outcomes from that 96 group. Venerable Kusuma going on to have such a global international reputation, Venerable Sudarshana becoming a preceptor, and a lot of really positive outcomes that are easy to miss, amongst all the negativity and some of the controversy that surrounded this ordination. Because, there's no inherent reason why this ordination had to be controversial. It could have just been a positive story of women getting ordained. And for me, that's the story that's really important. So that's the point I'd like to leave it there.
Thank you, Suvira.
Thank you.
That was illuminating. And we'll open it up now for questions. So if you've got a question, just raise your hand or put it in the chat room. I'd like to begin, and we would like to throw and get a word from Ranjani as she's with us. I'd just like to ask you, how do you feel personally? Like, it's 25 years on since the ordination. How do you feel towards what happened then and how it shaped your life, being able to become a Bhikkhuni?
Yeah, it's really interesting because there are so many streams involved in the Bikuni Revival. There's also, at the same time as you had things happening in Sri Lanka, you have things happening in the USA. And that was one of the insights for me from the book, is that, there's also the story of the Bikuni Revival in the USA that's happening alongside the Theravada Bikuni Revival in Asia. And Ayya Suvira has a paper honouring those worthy of honour, which really focuses on the contributions of Venerable Hawanpola Ratnasara. So because my own tradition, it really came via Ayya Wayama, via Ayya Tatalika. I feel that, we're actually there's a slightly separate history that doesn't always intersect directly with major ordinations like 96. Although that being said, my preceptor is Ayya Santini in Indonesia, and she was ordained in Taiwan as a direct result of Ranjani's work. So one of those very early ordinations in either 2000 or roundabout then.
Yeah.
So, you really see these very strong international networks, or what you should really call transnational networks, where, everyone's somehow connected. The USA is connected, Australia is connected, Sri Lanka is connected, all of these wonderful networks of international Buddhist women.
And one of the questions on the chat room is about Nuns Island. Is it still going? Is it still there?
No.
No.
My understanding is it's since been returned to the monks, and that's due to the civil unrest because of the insurgency. It became unsafe for nuns to stay there, and they couldn't attract nuns anymore. So that's my understanding is what's happened with that island.
Do you think it might be returned to the nuns in the future?
I have no personal connection with that group. I wouldn't know.
Ranjani, you're with us, and how do you feel having Ayya Suvira writing your story, and what was the whole process like? I understand it took years of chats between the pair of you.
It was wonderful. She was so patient, and she used to cry sometimes, and all tears dropping to her cheeks. She was so inspired. I just went on talking about what, like a picture, like a movie. I can remember every detail. So I just keep on telling her, and she was recording. It was wonderful, and she spent so much time. She knows more about me than I know, because she she had been Google and find places where I studied, my Sunday school and my village, and she was so inspired, and she wanted to give us. So I said, no, yeah, don't want to all this. No, this is very good. This Western, they will appreciate this. This is good, the background. So she had done so much, and she found some old photos, everything, and I'm ever so grateful to her for her patience. She took a lot of time. She spent, 2018-19.
Ranjani, before you joined us, I asked Ayya Suvira if she'd been to Sri Lanka, because her descriptions of the village you came from, and the food and the difficult times and your relatives, they're so vivid. And I thought she must have been in Sri Lanka to be able to write like that. So
yes,
obviously, there's a real symbiosis between the pair of you that has come across.
Very well connected, she was very connected, and it was really for me also that old, so my childhood story just came to my memories very clearly, and it was so wonderful in the village life. So compared to the modern life, we were so simple, but we were contented, no craving, so simple and wonderful. I can't believe now our children, they don't know what life is here.
It's quite difficult. I mean, at times.
Now difficult. Not then. Yes, it was so easy. I can't remember, even after the war, I remember I had some mention to her. Soon after, I was a little kid, I was going to the nursery or something. Then now we see those people going with the guns, and we were scared. We were trained to go creep under the table when the siren comes, all that. I didn't know what was happening. And so that was wonderful. All those stories came back to me, and I mentioned to her just like that. I didn't know it was going to be in the book, but I just went on telling her.
It brings colour to the book.
Yeah.
Really helps to it. Ranjani, I also wanted to ask you from, and I may have got this wrong, from what Ayya Suvira said, it was Ayya who really motivated you to go on and do the work you did with the conference and then with the higher ordinations. Is that correct? Was it motivation from Ayya or from others?
Actually, it was Ayya who inspired me to help the nuns. Soon after the 1987, I am always grateful to her, and I always mention at each conference I think of her. She called by my name. I don't know why. Out of at the formation of Saccadida, after the nuns conference, that is where we formed the association and named the Saccadida. And she said, Ranjani, you have to help the nuns when you go to Sri Lanka. And by that time, I have absorbed all what the papers read by other people, and Sri Lanka heritage and all this, how we had the Bikunis in the past. And we are neglecting these women who want to renounce. And then I felt ashamed and I felt guilty. Like I thought, no, I'm going to do something. That is how it started. No, I didn't have any association, just on my own. As I went back, I changed my attitude toward these Sila Mata. I went on looking for them. So little by little, I worked on my own, and finally I formed a branch, national branch of Saccadida, Sri Lanka. It is still working fine. And that is how it started in 91. After 4 years from 87, the second conference was organized in Thailand called Buddhist Women's Conference. And Bhikkhuni Dhammananda, she was Professor Chatsuma at that time, she organized it. So she also has mentioned about the book. There also I was planning, if easy, I'm going to do it in Sri Lanka, because they were talking so much of Sri Lanka and we have such a history. We have to invite all these women around the world, I love Saccadida, but it connected all the Buddhist women around the world. That is what I really like. Even you all know, that was beautiful. I'm really grateful to Venerable Lekshi and Tenzin Palma, all these leading Bikunis. So it was great. After the Thailand, I invited, they were not looking for a venue, and I just got up and said on my own, just another woman, simple. I on my own said, I invite you to hold the next conference in Sri Lanka, and I was there. That is the last time I saw her. And she was already sick and she never came for this Colombo conference. She encouraged me, yes, Ranjani, you can do it, go and do this, go and meet that one, this one. So that is how I started, and they couldn't believe that it is possible.
And it was it was a very successful conference.
Yeah, it was very successful.
I think everyone from the Prime Minister down.
And we didn't have any technology, no email, no type, nothing, only in my old typewriter and those long email letters. No emails, no nothing, but still it worked.
Another question has come in from Tamara asking, did you personally ever feel you wanted to ordain?
Pardon, I couldn't get the question.
Did you ever feel you wanted to ordain, to become a nun?
No, not really at this point. Maybe as a young girl, I was talking one day, I mentioned when I was 16 or something, teenager, we were talking. And that was inspired. We had only one Sila Mata educated one called Sudhamma, Sister Sudhamma. Everybody was talking about her, my sisters. She was a graduate first time. We had a graduate nun. But she also ended up as a Sila Mata. She never came to become Bhikkhuni, nothing. But it was inspiring to hear an educated woman had become a Sila Mata. So that time we're talking, and I just mentioned, and my teacher said, you become a nun with another man's son. That's maybe I just talking about interest in the nuns. Never under this, I don't think, if the circumstances like this, I would have considered, but not under those conditions, yes. It never came to me.
Ayya Suvira mentioned the opposition there was to her ordination.
Yes.
So in Sri Lanka itself, how much opposition was there from the sort of the Buddhist establishment who liked things the way they were? They didn't necessarily.
Very much. I had to. It was like we did it secretly almost. We were not talking about it. Yeah, even Bhante Viprasada said, don't mention even that we're going to give ordination. So we were just doing it on the cover. So we never announced it. Only after the ordination happened, we send the photos, and it was announced in the television and say, Bhikkhuni Revival, Bhikkhuni Upasampada has been revived or something like that in the open news, and then only it came. It was controversial, and the monks they got the news, and it became. So by that time we have done our job. So after we did it, it doesn't matter. So when we heard,
the ordination itself, was it in Korea or India? I'm not. Where was
India,
it?
Saranath. Yeah.
India. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I traveled with those 10 nuns. Together, 2 nights in the train from Chennai to Varanasi. So that was interesting. Nobody, no man, only I was with the 10 nuns. So everything was arranged by Mahabodhis India, all the room, everything. So we were comfortable, but I had no fear or nothing. But there were already the senior Sila Matas were gone ahead there to watch what is happening, and they're very angry about it. I have mentioned that, how they were resenting and what is happening to this, because they were not the most senior nuns we selected. So because the conditions were not so, they never thought. Very difficult, I mean, at least to find those 10, because they were not convinced whether it is possible. That is why I'm happy that it was successful, especially because Ayya Kusuma was the leader. Otherwise, normally another just ordinary, I mean, because with her education and her knowledge and her personality, and that was very, that supported my work. If not for her, maybe it wouldn't have been so successful, and also without me, she wouldn't have become a bhikkhuni. So it was like two of us work together, like it was necessary, that it just happened that way.
Is that because Kusuma had a very successful academic professional career before she decided to become a nun, but she was accepted by the establishment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. I have my respect for her all the time, and sometimes monks say, who is she? She's not a bhikkhuni, but when they see her and when she goes to the society, they can't say no, because she's accepted everywhere. And
how did things change? When did the higher ordained Bikunis begin to be accepted in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, now about 4,000, so many. But it's officially there are still some. There are three main nikayas. Almost two have accepted, except this Siam and the Thailand that came. They are not saying, but unofficially they are working, and I must say we had no objections, and they never obstructed any work done from day one. After ordination, when they returned to Sri Lanka, in 98 group came first, because 96 group were not allowed to come. They were asked to stay there for 3 years. So 98 ordination came immediately after their ordination. They landed in Sri Lanka, and they came in procession, and I attended to those ceremonies. They were well accepted. The monks from the area came and gave talks, and very good welcome. I mean, they never protested. They did all what they could do, rituals, and finally, one by one, they were having dana together, sitting in the same place like that. So maybe still some are not, but we got the very good response from the monks. You can't blame them. Yeah.
We're almost out of time, Ranjani, but how do you feel for what you've done? You've first how do you feel 25 years on?
Yeah, I didn't know that. It just happened. I don't know. I think the good intention. It was my intention to help the poor Silamatas. I felt sad, the condition that they were living after being renounced, after listening to and hearing the history. That is how it started. It led to the way the Dhamma works. It just one by one after. I didn't plan anything. It just followed. When I do one thing, the next thing follows. And I never asked for a cent, 1 rupee even. But it just happened. And the right person comes in the correct time, right? I got the support from.
I think you were the right person, Ranjani.
So everything fell in line. It's wonderful. I never asked for anything. But all the help came, and all the support came. So sometimes when they say I'm doing the wrong thing and I'm ruining the Buddha Sasana, I go to, the Vishnu King, they say the God Vishnu is supposed to be protecting the Sasana. So there is the famous temple, there's a big Vishnu Devala there. So I sometimes go and then recite the Metta Sutra, and then just wish, if it is wrong, it may not happen, I'm sure. Then I see the light and everything is successful. I knew I was doing the correct thing. Nobody could stop me. Even my own sisters, they were very angry about it, the senior elder ones. But luckily, when I came to Australia, my brother offered the house as a Sangamita, my sisters started supporting the nuns. So it just happened here.
That's a whole different story of how the nuns establishment began to develop in Australia.
Yes.
Just we are running out of time, and there's a few questions. But how do you feel? I know you spent the last 2 years in Newbury with younger Bikunis.
Yeah.
How do you feel mixing with them?
I feel happy every time they get the high ordination. I said, oh, one more. I say, may they bloom like lotuses. And so I always say, keep adding all bikunis into the counting. It's just so wonderful to see, not only everywhere, bikunis, even Dhammasara bikuni, beautiful, Newberry, everywhere. The Ayya Tata logo keeps me all the time, writing to me nice things. So Ayani wrote that. So they all appreciate and they knew me from the beginning. So I didn't realize, and the Bhikuni Dhammananda appreciate a lot. In Thailand, she says that I helped a lot for her. Yes, Thailand is so very bad. I have mentioned once we went and did.
Yeah, I think Thailand and Dhammananda is another chapter, Ranjani.
Yeah.
I'll come back to you in a minute because we really want to talk about
No, it's all in the book. Yeah, it's all in the book.
We really want to talk about what's happening in Sri Lanka now.
I didn't expect all these things. I didn't want even a biography. I didn't know. People say to write. I said, I'm not a person to write. I'm a person who works, but not writing. I'm famous for not writing notes or not keeping any note, but I just keep doing things on my. I plan and it works.
It just happened, and that's
Thank you.
And that's wonderful.
Yes. Thank you for all your help. Yeah, thank you.
Ayya Suvira, is there anything you'd like to say as we come to the end of the webinar?
Yeah, I think there's a few questions in the chat. If it's okay, might be good to address some of those.
Okay, so one question that's coming from Tamara. One more. Do some women these days prefer to be sila matters, is it, rather than bikinis?
Yeah. So if it's okay, I'll take that one. So a sila mata being a 10 precept nun. So this is the type of ordination form that's emerged in Sri Lanka in particular in the absence of bhikkhuni ordination. So I think, the question was, do some women prefer to be sila matas rather than bhikkhunis? What we need to understand here is that it's not necessarily a free choice, because the way that the Sri Lankan Buddhist system works, basically you have an ID card, and you need your ID card to do various things, such as sitting exams, and sometimes you also need permission. I was hearing recently from the Sila Mata Association to travel overseas as a nun. So the system forces women into particular forms, because to be a bhikkhuni in Sri Lanka, there are barriers. The biggest one of those being the absence of ID cards. And Buddhism in Sri Lanka is managed by a department called the Ministry of the Buddhist Sasana. And for a brief period in the early 2000s, they did actually issue bhikkhuni ID cards. So I think some of the nuns who are around in maybe the early 2000s, they may still have ID cards that say bhikkhuni so-and-so. But since about 2004, those ID cards were no longer issued. The ministry did a backflip and, decided to cease issuing those cards, just making life generally difficult, for the nuns who are in the system. So at present, there are more sila matas than bhikkhunis in Sri Lanka. The numbers I've been given, or that rather Ranjani was given by Venerable Sadasumana, who's a senior preceptor for Dambala in Sri Lanka, was a total of about 3,000 bhikkhunis. So in terms of the sila mata numbers, I don't know exact numbers, but maybe slightly more sila matas than bhikkhunis in Sri Lanka. So yeah, I mean, there are women who are actively choosing to be sila matas, even though bhikkhuni ordination is available. Some of the driving factors behind that are just A, because it's easier. B, maybe they have a particular teacher who supports a particular ordination form, or, you know, they may be older generation and not necessarily so interested in anything different. A lot of, you know, personal and individual choices, and a lot of non-choices too, because, you know, genuine religious freedom for Buddhist women in Asia around ordination choices is not necessarily something that always exists when you have Buddhism existing alongside state Buddhism. So that's just my comment on that point.
Yeah, Tanara put in the next question. Do Bikunis officially exist in Sri Lanka?
I mean, Ranjani mentioned earlier about support. So Sri Lanka has three main Nikayas, or three main monastic groups. So one of them is Siam Nikaya, which is the tradition that comes via Thailand. Another one is Amarapura Nikaya, which is the tradition that comes via Burma. And the third one is Ramanya Nikaya, which is a separate Burmese tradition. So in recent years, the relationship between the Amarapura and Ramanya Nikayas may have changed. I'm not really up to date on the details, but that's the way it used to be anyway. So within those three Nikayas, the ones that acknowledge Bikunis, so the Askirya branch of the Siam Nikaya does. So they are a subsect of the Siam Nikaya that has supported Bikunis since the get-go, since 1998. Some branches of the Amarapura Nikaya also support Bikunis. So we're really blessed to have Venerable Vijayananda online. So she was actually awarded an Outstanding Service Award via the Amarapura Nikaya, you know, via a Bikuni supporting branch. So that's why it's complicated, because, you know, these are official branches, and some of these official branches of Sri Lankan Buddhism do actually support Bikunis. So you have this just this rather unfortunate situation that, you know, even like the funding was recently given for the nuns colleges too, like official government funding for Bikuni colleges. But you have like certain issues that are still ongoing, like the ID card issue. So that's just, you know, my comments on that based on what I've heard recently from my friends in Colombo.
Thank you. And we've got a very pertinent question that's come in from Sky. So what is the current situation for the nuns and the Bikunis in Sri Lanka, given the really dire economic situation? Ranjani, can you perhaps pick up on that?
Yeah, generally all the nuns, normally they are respected by the community and they all receive the dana, no problem. They are very well looked at. But due to the present situation is sad, during the COVID period, also we attended with the Alliance of Bikunis, gave us a lot of help and funding. And we managed to, through Saccadida, Sri Lanka, to distribute the funds and the rations and all to the about 15 nunneries around the remote areas. And also some funds went direct to the colleges, monastic education centers where there are 50-60 young nuns are educated. So Alliance of Bikunis were very kind that day. It was very more than the present condition. That time there were no way of COVID time. There were no dana for some places because people lost their couldn't go to work and all lockdown. And there were some floods and then elephants ruining the crops. A lot of things happened in the outstations. So we managed to reach those areas, and Bhikkuni Vijayananda did a great job.
So it's, Ranjani, it's the two things happening. It's the all the difficulties of COVID, and then the economic and political problems.
Yes, otherwise no problem. Only political issues at the moment is difficult. Again, the prices have gone up. The food. I mean, there are more than hundreds of more than 700 nunneries there, or the Bhikkhuni aramas there already in the country villages. So many. So sometimes because they are unable to express themselves because they don't have the English and the computer knowledge to speak to. Maybe a few Bikunis can write and say their conditions, but at this point I don't think we can help in the renovating buildings all day. Only thing we have to see about their food, meal, food supply. So recently, the present situation during the Sri Lanka New Year was in April 13-14. That week, we received some help from Fogwanshan, Taiwan, BLIA, Buddha's Light International Association. Bhikkhuni chairman is stationed in Sri Lanka and working with Bhikkhuni Vijayananda together, helping. So they provided a lot of rations and they traveled faraway places and give them food parcels, the rations. So that was great help. I have many photos.
And Ranjani, we really appreciate the work you're doing, and Saccadida Australia would like to give our support to Saccadida Sri Lanka in the work that you're doing. I think we've got, Sonia, I think we've got some photos that Ranjani has sent us of the aid being delivered. I'm not sure if we can see those, but in our chat room, if anyone would like to help, at the moment, there you go, the nuns distributing at a nunnery. Yeah.
Rice bags, everything.
This is the work that's going on, and we would like to support. And if people would like to help us today, we've put our bank details in the chat room, and any donations would be welcome, and they'll go straight to Sri Lanka, and no administration or anything. They go straight to supporting the nuns there. So thank you, Sonia. That's great. So I think that's it for today. Ayya Suvira, do you have any closing words for us?
There's another comment in the chat that was a question that's been sent to me individually, I think. Okay. So Ben's asked, are there temporary ordination? I don't know anyone who currently does women's temporary ordination in Sri Lanka. Ranjani, do you?
Yeah, they just started this time a few Bhikkhuni Vijayananda. She told me this time she started few first time. She used to give without shaving. She used to have, keep them like 10 precepts and keep them in noble silence and practice for 1 month, 2 months. But recently she said she's going to start. I think she did one batch. So it will continue. I think it will come because Bhante Vimala Jyoti, he had been doing this for the Kanduvala.
So that would be temporary novice ordination, yeah? Samaneri.
Samaneri. They become Samaneri, like in Thailand, they do. So we don't have it in Sri Lanka. We had for the males once, and it was very highly criticized, but then he had explained it was so good, those who had experienced the bhikkhu life, so they become better people, like they understand. So nuns also, slowly it will come to temporary ordination as well. Yeah. At the moment, because of this political situation and COVID and the progress, it was a bit slow, but it's coming to that. Yeah.
Thank you. And so I'd like to thank very much Ayya Suvira, and congratulations again on your book. I'd urge everyone to get a copy. It's a great read. It's very colourful, and it's a lovely story, Ranjani's story, and it goes right back to her early days.
Yes.
It's a lovely story, and you can buy a copy, and I've put those details in the chat room.